The forest exhaled secrets, a damp, earthy breath that clung to the skin and whispered of things unseen. He smelled it before he saw it, that primal, musky odor that clung to the undergrowth like a shroud. He'd been tracking it for 9 days, his legs burning, his resolve hardening with each snapped twig and overturned stone. 9 days chasing a ghost, a legend, a creature that existed only in the shadowy corners of the human imagination. Until now. Arthur was 70 years old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and wind, his eyes the color of faded denim, holding a depth of knowledge that only a lifetime spent in the wilderness could provide. He wasn't a scientist, not in the formal sense. He was a tracker, a naturalist, a student of the wild, a man who spoke the language of the trees and understood the silent conversations of the animals. He was, some might say, a fool, chasing shadows in the vast expanse of the Pacific Northwest. But Arthur knew better. He'd seen things, felt things, things that defied explanation, things that gnawed at the edges of his sanity and kept him coming back, year after year, to this remote corner of the world. It had started innocently enough, decades ago, with a fleeting glimpse, a rustle in the bushes, an impression of immense size and power moving through the trees. Most would have dismissed it as a bear, a deer, a trick of the light. But Arthur knew the difference. He knew the weight of a bear's footfall, the scent of a deer in the wind. This was something else, something heavier, something different. Over the years, the glimpses became more frequent, the evidence more compelling. Overturned logs that no human could have moved. Tracks, too large and too deeply impressed to be anything known to science. Strange, guttural vocalizations echoing through the valleys at night. He collected casts of the tracks, meticulously documented the sightings, filled notebooks with observations. He showed his findings to scientists, to park rangers, to anyone who would listen. He was met with skepticism, with ridicule, with outright dismissal. They called him crazy, obsessed, a crank. But Arthur didn't care. He knew what he'd seen. He knew what he'd heard. And he knew he wasn't alone. This latest expedition, however, was different. This was the culmination of years of research, of painstaking planning, of gut feeling that he was finally on the verge of something extraordinary. He'd been following a fresh set of tracks for 9 days, each one larger and more defined than the last. The tracks led him deeper and deeper into the wilderness, into a labyrinth of dense forests, treacherous ravines, and hidden valleys. He'd slept under the stars, eaten what he could find, pushed his aging body to its absolute limit. But he wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. He was too close. The smell intensified as he crested a small ridge. He paused, catching his breath, his senses on high alert. The air was thick with anticipation, with the feeling of being watched. He slowly moved forward, his boots sinking into the soft earth, his rifle held at the ready. He emerged into a small clearing, a place of eerie stillness and unnatural silence. And there, in the center of the clearing, were the tracks. Imprints so large, so deep, that they looked as if they had been made by some giant, prehistoric creature. But it wasn't just the size of the tracks that caught his attention. It was the pattern. They weren't just footprints. They were intentional. They formed a spiral, a deliberate, almost ritualistic design in the earth. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine, a primal fear that he hadn't felt since he was a child. This wasn't just about finding a creature. This was about something else, something far more profound, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. He carefully examined the spiral, his eyes scanning every detail. He noticed something else, something almost hidden, a small, smooth stone placed precisely in the center of the spiral. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. It was ordinary, unremarkable, except for one thing, it was warm. As if it had been recently held. He raised his head, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. He knew he wasn't alone. He could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes upon him, the presence of something large and powerful watching from the shadows. He slowly lowered the stone, his hand trembling. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "I know you're there," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I mean you no harm." The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. He waited, his senses straining, his muscles tensed. Then, a sound. A low, guttural growl, a sound that resonated deep within his bones. It came from the trees, from the darkness, a sound that spoke of immense power and ancient rage. He slowly turned towards the sound, his rifle raised, his finger on the trigger. And then he saw it. A figure, massive and dark, standing just beyond the edge of the clearing. It was silhouetted against the trees, its form indistinct in the shadows, but its presence was undeniable. It was tall, easily 8 feet or more, its body covered in thick, dark hair. Its arms were long and powerful, its shoulders broad and imposing. It stood perfectly still, its head slightly bowed, as if studying him. Arthur stared, his mind reeling, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd spent decades searching for this creature, and now, here it was, just a few yards away, a living, breathing embodiment of the legend. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there, frozen in fear. But he couldn't move. He was transfixed, mesmerized by the sheer size and power of the creature. He slowly lowered his rifle, his hand shaking. He knew that he couldn't shoot it. He wouldn't. He'd come this far not to kill, but to understand. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice trembling. "I just want to understand." The creature remained still, its eyes fixed on him. Arthur could feel its gaze, intense and penetrating, as if it were peering into his very soul. He waited, his breath held, his body trembling. He didn't know what to expect, what the creature would do. He only knew that he was in its domain, at its mercy. Then, the creature moved. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped out of the shadows and into the clearing. Arthur gasped. He could see it clearly now, its massive body, its thick, matted hair, its powerful limbs. Its face was partially obscured by hair, but he could see its eyes, intelligent and piercing, filled with a sadness that resonated deep within him. It took another step, and another, until it was just a few feet away from him. Arthur could smell it now, the musky, primal odor that he had been tracking for days. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, a smell that spoke of the wild, of the ancient, of a world untouched by man. The creature stopped, its eyes fixed on him. It reached out a hand that was enormous and powerful, yet surprisingly gentle. Arthur hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out his own hand, his fingers trembling. Their hands met, the contact sending a jolt of energy through his body. The creature's hand was warm, rough, and surprisingly soft. They stood there, hand in hand, for what seemed like an eternity. Arthur felt a connection with the creature, a sense of understanding, a feeling that they were both part of something larger, something more profound. He looked into its eyes, and he saw not a monster, but a being, a creature of intelligence and compassion, a fellow inhabitant of this planet. Then, the creature spoke. It wasn't a word, not in the human sense. It was a sound, a guttural vocalization, a complex series of tones and inflections that seemed to bypass his conscious mind and resonate directly with his soul. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. It was a warning, a plea, a lament. It spoke of the forest, of the destruction of its habitat, of the encroachment of man. It spoke of the pain and suffering of its kind, of the loss of its home. It spoke of the need for understanding, for respect, for protection. Arthur listened, his heart aching with sorrow and compassion. He understood now what he had to do. He had to tell the world what he had seen, what he had heard. He had to convince people that this creature was not a monster, but a sentient being, deserving of protection and respect. The creature released his hand, its eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. It turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing into the shadows as quickly and silently as it had appeared. Arthur stood there, alone in the clearing, his heart filled with a sense of purpose and determination. He knew that his life would never be the same. He turned and began to walk back the way he had come, his legs tired but his spirit renewed. He had a story to tell, a story that could change the world. He returned to the small town where he had been staying, his clothes torn, his face scratched, his eyes burning with exhaustion. He went straight to the local newspaper office, his story spilling out in a torrent of words, his passion and conviction undeniable. The editor, a cynical old man who had seen it all, listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He left the newspaper office, unsure of what to expect. He knew that most people would dismiss his story as the ravings of an old man, but he hoped that some would listen, that some would believe. He went back to his cabin, his mind racing, his heart pounding with anticipation. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The newspaper published his story, but it was buried on page 12, a small, insignificant article accompanied by a grainy photograph of a footprint. He received a few calls, mostly from cranks and conspiracy theorists, but no one seemed to take him seriously. He didn't give up. He contacted scientists, environmental organizations, anyone who would listen. He sent them his evidence, his photographs, his casts of the tracks. He pleaded with them to investigate, to take his story seriously. Slowly, gradually, some people began to listen. A few scientists, intrigued by his evidence, agreed to examine his findings. An environmental organization offered to fund a small expedition to the area where he had seen the creature. Hope began to flicker in his heart. He knew that it would be a long, difficult battle, but he was determined to fight for the creature, to protect its home, to ensure its survival. He joined the expedition, guiding the scientists and researchers through the wilderness, showing them the tracks, the nests, the other signs of the creature's presence. They were impressed by his knowledge, by his dedication, by his unwavering belief. The expedition made some significant discoveries. They found more tracks, more nests, more evidence of the creature's existence. They recorded strange vocalizations, analyzed hair samples, and collected DNA evidence. They were beginning to build a case, a scientific case, for the existence of Bigfoot. But then, tragedy struck. One of the researchers, a young, ambitious scientist eager to make a name for himself, decided to take matters into his own hands. He set up a trap, a hidden snare designed to capture the creature. Arthur was horrified. He confronted the researcher, pleaded with him to dismantle the trap, but the researcher refused. He was convinced that capturing the creature was the only way to prove its existence, to secure funding for further research, to make a name for himself. Arthur knew that he had to stop him. He went out into the forest, determined to find the trap and disable it before it was too late. He searched for hours, his heart pounding with anxiety, his mind filled with dread. Finally, he found it. The trap was well hidden, cleverly disguised beneath a pile of leaves and branches. He began to dismantle it, his hands trembling. Suddenly, he heard a sound. A low, guttural growl, a sound that he knew all too well. He turned around, his heart sinking. The creature was standing there, just a few feet away, its eyes filled with rage and betrayal. It had seen the trap. It knew that it was a trap. And it knew that Arthur was responsible. Arthur tried to explain, to apologize, to convince the creature that he had nothing to do with the trap. But the creature wouldn't listen. It charged at him, its massive body a blur of fur and muscle. Arthur tried to run, but he was too old, too slow. The creature tackled him to the ground, its powerful hands pinning him down. He looked up into its eyes, and he saw not the intelligence and compassion that he had seen before, but pure, unadulterated rage. He knew that he was going to die. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the end. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature hesitated. It looked down at him, its eyes softening. It saw the fear in his eyes, the pain in his face. It saw the sincerity in his heart. It released him. It stood up, its eyes filled with sadness and regret. It turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. Arthur lay there on the ground, his body bruised and battered, his mind reeling. He had been spared. He had been given a second chance. He slowly got to his feet, his body aching. He knew that he couldn't stay there. He had to leave, to protect the creature, to prevent any further harm from coming to it. He walked back to the camp, packed his bags, and left. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He just disappeared into the wilderness, determined to spend the rest of his life protecting the creature, guarding its home, ensuring its survival. He lived in the forest for years, a solitary figure, a guardian of the wild. He learned to live in harmony with nature, to respect the creatures that shared his domain. He became a legend himself, a mythical figure whispered about in hushed tones by the local inhabitants. He never saw the creature again, but he knew that it was there, watching him, protecting him. He could feel its presence, the weight of its gaze upon him, the silent understanding between them. He lived a long and fulfilling life, a life dedicated to the preservation of the wild, to the protection of the creature that had changed his life forever. He died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the trees that he loved, his heart filled with contentment. His story lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of belief, the importance of respect, and the enduring mystery of the wild. But that wasn't all he discovered. During those 9 days, Arthur stumbled upon something far more terrifying than a solitary, misunderstood creature. He found a pattern, a recurring motif in the creature's movements, in the placement of the stones, in the very architecture of its hidden world. It wasn't just surviving, it was preparing. Preparing for something he couldn't quite grasp, something that felt both ancient and imminent. He dismissed it as old age catching up with him until he found the cave. Hidden behind a waterfall, a place no human should ever find, was a cave filled with symbols. Not just random markings, but carefully etched symbols that resembled no known language on Earth. They depicted celestial events, strange constellations, and beings that defied description. And at the heart of the cave, a large, flat stone, covered in blood. Fresh blood. What ritual was being performed? What was the creature preparing for? And what role, if any, did humanity play in this terrifying equation? The answers, he suspected, were buried deep within the forest, waiting to be unearthed. But some secrets, he feared, were better left undisturbed. Especially when they seemed to stare back. Were they truly alone in the woods? Or were they part of something larger, something darker, something waiting patiently in the shadows? The symbols haunted Arthur's waking hours and bled into his dreams, a chaotic jumble of lines and circles, of impossible geometries and star-strewn skies. They were a riddle wrapped in an enigma, dipped in the primal fear of the unknown. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he couldn't simply ignore them. The blood on the altar-like stone was a clear indicator that this was more than just the wanderings of a wild animal. He needed to decipher them, to understand their purpose, before whatever they foretold came to pass. His self-imposed exile had been a conscious choice, a deliberate severing of ties with the world he had once known. He'd become a hermit, a guardian of the woods, content to observe and protect the creature he had come to respect. But the cave, the symbols, the blood, they shattered that peaceful existence, thrusting him back into the role of investigator, of seeker of truth. This time, however, the truth might be more than he could bear. He began by meticulously documenting the symbols, sketching them in his worn leather-bound journal. He categorized them, grouped them by similarities, searched for patterns and repetitions. He consulted his collection of books, a small library he had painstakingly carried into the forest over the years, poring over texts on ancient languages, mythology, astronomy, and cryptozoology. He devoured information on everything from Sumerian cuneiform to obscure Native American petroglyphs, searching for a connection, a Rosetta Stone that could unlock the meaning of the symbols. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The task was daunting, the sheer volume of information overwhelming. He felt like a man lost in a labyrinth, each turn leading to another dead end. He considered abandoning the effort, retreating back into his self-imposed ignorance, but the image of the blood-stained stone, the creature's intense, almost desperate gaze, spurred him on. He owed it to the forest, to the creature, and perhaps to humanity itself, to uncover the truth. One evening, while studying a chart of constellations, a familiar pattern caught his eye. It was a constellation not recognized by modern astronomy, but one depicted in ancient Babylonian star maps. It was called the Watcher, a celestial entity said to observe and record the events of the world. The constellation's arrangement mirrored a cluster of symbols he had found in a cave, symbols that seemed to depict a procession of figures, beings that were neither human nor animal, moving towards a central point. A shiver ran down his spine. Could these symbols be connected to an ancient cult, a secret society that worshipped extraterrestrial entities? The idea seemed far-fetched, the stuff of science fiction, but the more he studied the symbols, the more plausible it became. He remembered the creature's vocalizations, the complex series of tones and inflections that had resonated directly with his soul. Could it be communicating in a language not of this world? He decided to focus his research on the constellation, the Watcher, and its associated mythology. He delved into ancient texts, legends, and folklore, searching for any mention of similar symbols or rituals. He discovered that the constellation was often associated with prophecies, with warnings of impending doom, and with the arrival of beings from beyond the stars. One particular text caught his attention, a fragment of an ancient Sumerian tablet that described a ritual performed to appease the Watchers, a ritual that involved the sacrifice of a creature, pure of heart and innocent of mind. The description of the creature bore a striking resemblance to the creature he had encountered in the forest. A cold dread settled in his stomach. Was the creature in the forest being groomed for sacrifice? Was it part of a larger plan, a cosmic scheme that he was only beginning to understand? The blood on the stone, the fresh blood, could that have been from another of its kind? Was the creature performing the ritual itself? Was it willingly taking on the role of executioner in order to protect its own species from a greater evil? He knew he had to find out more. He needed to understand the full extent of the creature's involvement, its motivations, its ultimate goal. He decided to try to communicate with it again, to see if he could glean any information from its vocalizations, its behavior. But how could he approach it without triggering another violent reaction? How could he convince it that he was not a threat, that he was genuinely trying to help? He remembered the creature's eyes, the sadness he had seen there, the plea for understanding. He realized that he had to appeal to its emotions, to its sense of empathy. He decided to create a symbol of peace, a gesture of goodwill that would transcend the language barrier. He spent days crafting a small sculpture out of wood and stone, a stylized representation of a tree, a symbol of life, growth, and interconnectedness. He carefully carved the symbols of the Watcher onto the base of the sculpture, hoping to show the creature that he understood its connection to the celestial entities. He planned to leave the sculpture in the clearing where they had first met, hoping that the creature would find it and recognize his intention. He ventured back into the familiar clearing, the air thick with anticipation. He placed the sculpture in the center of the open space, carefully arranging it so that it faced the direction of the setting sun. He stepped back, his heart pounding, and waited. The hours passed, but the creature did not appear. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. He began to lose hope, wondering if he had made a mistake, if his gesture had been misinterpreted. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a rustling in the trees. The creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes fixed on the sculpture. It approached cautiously, sniffing the air, its senses alert. Arthur held his breath, his body trembling. He watched as the creature circled the sculpture, examining it from every angle. He could see the curiosity in its eyes, the flicker of recognition. Finally, the creature reached out a hand, its enormous fingers gently touching the surface of the sculpture. It traced the symbols of the Watcher, its brow furrowed in concentration. Then, it looked up at Arthur, its eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and understanding. It let out a soft, mournful vocalization, a sound that seemed to express both gratitude and sorrow. Arthur felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had made contact. He had established a connection. Now, he just had to find a way to communicate, to understand the creature's secrets, to unravel the mystery of the symbols. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched, offering a gesture of peace. The creature hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out its own hand. Their hands met, the contact sending a jolt of energy through his body. This time, however, the connection was different. It wasn't just a feeling of understanding, a sense of shared humanity. It was something more profound, something more alien. He felt a rush of images, of sensations, of thoughts that were not his own. He saw visions of distant worlds, of ancient civilizations, of beings beyond comprehension. He stumbled backward, overwhelmed by the torrent of information. The creature released his hand, its eyes filled with concern. Arthur gasped for air, trying to regain his composure. He realized that the creature had shared its memories, its knowledge, its very essence with him. He now understood the true nature of the symbols, the purpose of the rituals, the threat that loomed over humanity. The symbols were not just representations of celestial events, they were keys to unlocking a gateway to another dimension, a dimension inhabited by beings of immense power and unimaginable cruelty. The rituals were designed to weaken the barrier between dimensions, to pave the way for the arrival of these beings. The creature was not a willing participant in the rituals, it was a guardian, a protector, tasked with preventing the gateway from being opened. It had been performing the rituals in reverse, using its own blood to seal the cracks in the dimensional barrier. But it was losing the battle. The barrier was weakening, the cracks were widening. The beings from the other dimension were growing stronger, their influence spreading across the earth. The creature had been trying to warn humanity, to alert them to the impending danger. But its warnings had gone unheeded. Now, it was up to Arthur to act, to find a way to stop the invasion before it was too late. He knew that he couldn't do it alone. He needed to find allies, people who would believe him, people who would be willing to fight. But who would believe a crazy old man living in the woods, a man who claimed to have communicated with Bigfoot? He had to find a way to prove his story, to provide irrefutable evidence of the existence of the creatures from the other dimension. He needed to capture one of them, to bring it back to the world as a warning. The creature, sensing his thoughts, let out a sharp, warning vocalization. It shook its head, its eyes filled with fear. It knew that such an action would be suicidal, that it would only hasten the opening of the gateway. But Arthur was determined. He knew that he had to take the risk, that the fate of humanity depended on it. He turned to the creature, his eyes filled with resolve. "I know it's dangerous," he said, "but we have no choice. We have to fight back. We have to protect our world." The creature looked at him, its eyes filled with sadness and resignation. It knew that he was right. It nodded slowly, its massive body trembling. Together, they would embark on a new quest, a quest to confront the darkness that threatened to consume the world. They would venture into the heart of the forest, seeking the source of the dimensional disturbance. They would face unimaginable horrors, confront beings beyond human comprehension. And in the end, they would either save the world, or be consumed by the darkness themselves. The forest, once a sanctuary, was now a battleground, and Arthur, the old hermit, was now a soldier in a war he never asked to fight. The lines between reality and nightmare had blurred, and he found himself standing on the precipice of a terrifying new world, a world where the legends were real, and the monsters were waiting. What he didn't know was how far back this all went, or that this creature may have been the last of its kind, or the first of a new kind of guardian. The blood, and the symbols, would eventually be traced back to a far older source than he could even imagine. The plan was fraught with peril from its inception. Arthur understood the sheer impossibility of capturing a being from another dimension, a being whose very existence defied the laws of physics as he understood them. He was, in essence, a man with a rusty knife preparing to fight a god. Yet, the memories, the shared knowledge gifted by the creature, burned in his mind, a constant reminder of the stakes. He wasn't just fighting for himself, or even for humanity, he was fighting for the preservation of reality itself. The creature, who Arthur now mentally referred to as Guardian even though he didn't know its true name, led him deeper into the forest than he had ever ventured. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwined, blotting out the sunlight. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness. The sounds of the forest, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, faded into an eerie silence. It was as if they had entered a zone where the natural order held no sway. Guardian moved with a purpose, its senses seemingly attuned to something beyond Arthur's perception. It paused frequently, sniffing the air, listening intently, its massive head cocked to one side. Arthur followed close behind, his senses on high alert, his hand gripping the worn handle of his hunting knife. He knew it was a pathetic weapon against the forces they were about to face, but it was all he had. After what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a clearing unlike any Arthur had ever seen. The trees surrounding the clearing were gnarled and twisted, their bark covered in strange, pulsating veins. The ground was littered with strange, iridescent fungi, glowing with an unnatural light. In the center of the clearing stood a monolith, a towering structure of black obsidian, its surface covered in the same symbols that Arthur had seen in the cave, only larger, more intricate, more menacing. The air around the monolith crackled with energy, a palpable force that made Arthur's skin crawl. This was the nexus point, the place where the veil between dimensions was thinnest. Guardian stopped at the edge of the clearing, its body tense, its eyes fixed on the monolith. It let out a low growl, a warning sound that resonated deep within Arthur's chest. He knew, instinctively, that they were not alone. From the shadows of the trees, creatures began to emerge. They were grotesque parodies of life, beings that seemed to be composed of mismatched parts, their bodies twisted and contorted into unnatural shapes. Some were tall and spindly, with elongated limbs and razor-sharp claws. Others were squat and bulbous, with thick hides and rows of jagged teeth. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, their gaze fixed on Arthur and Guardian. These were the beings from the other dimension, the creatures that Guardian had been fighting to keep at bay. Arthur felt a surge of fear, a primal instinct to flee. But he stood his ground, his hand tightening on his knife. He knew that running was not an option. He had come too far, he had seen too much. He had a responsibility to fight, to protect the world from these abominations. Guardian let out a deafening roar, a challenge to the creatures that dared to trespass on its territory. It charged into the clearing, its massive body a whirlwind of fur and muscle. The creatures lunged forward to meet it, their claws and teeth bared. The battle was joined. Arthur watched in horror as Guardian fought against the horde of creatures. It was a desperate struggle, a clash between the natural world and the forces of nightmare. Guardian fought with incredible ferocity, its claws tearing through flesh, its teeth crushing bone. But the creatures were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. They swarmed over Guardian, their claws tearing at its fur, their teeth sinking into its flesh. Arthur knew that he had to do something, anything, to help. He couldn't just stand there and watch Guardian be torn apart. He charged into the fray, his knife raised, his heart pounding in his chest. He slashed and stabbed at the creatures, his movements clumsy and ineffective. He managed to wound a few of them, but they barely seemed to notice. They were too focused on Guardian, their hatred, their hunger, directed at the one being that stood between them and their ultimate goal. As Arthur fought, he began to understand the true nature of the creatures. They were not simply monsters, mindless beasts driven by instinct. They were something far more sinister, something more intelligent, more malevolent. They were beings of pure chaos, beings that thrived on destruction and suffering. They saw the world as a canvas, and they sought to paint it with their own twisted vision. He noticed that they were being led. From behind the ranks of the monstrous horde stepped a figure unlike the others, an entity radiating palpable authority. This being was taller, more refined, yet infinitely more terrifying. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but its skin was as black as night, and its eyes burned with an unholy fire. It wore a long, flowing robe, adorned with symbols that mirrored those on the monolith, and in its hand, it held a staff of twisted bone. This was not merely a creature, it was a priest, a sorcerer, a general of the invading force. The sorcerer raised its staff, and the ground beneath Arthur's feet began to tremble. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. He felt a surge of nausea, a sense of impending doom. The sorcerer was channeling the energy of the monolith, amplifying its power, preparing to unleash a devastating attack. Arthur knew that he had to stop it, but he was too far away, too slow. The sorcerer was about to unleash its power, and there was nothing he could do to prevent it. Suddenly, Guardian roared again, a sound of pure defiance. It threw off the creatures that were clinging to it, its body covered in wounds, its fur matted with blood. It charged towards the sorcerer, its eyes blazing with fury. The sorcerer turned to face Guardian, its eyes filled with contempt. It raised its staff, preparing to strike. But before it could act, Guardian leaped forward, its massive body crashing into the sorcerer. The force of the impact shattered the sorcerer's staff, sending shards of bone flying through the air. The sorcerer staggered backward, its eyes wide with shock. Guardian seized the opportunity, its claws tearing into the sorcerer's flesh. The sorcerer screamed in agony, its voice a piercing shriek that echoed through the clearing. It thrashed and struggled, but Guardian held on tight, its grip unyielding. The sorcerer's black blood splattered across the ground, sizzling and steaming as it touched the iridescent fungi. With a final, desperate heave, Guardian ripped the sorcerer in two, its body collapsing in a heap on the ground. The remaining creatures recoiled in horror, their morale broken. They hesitated, unsure of what to do. Guardian stood over the sorcerer's corpse, its chest heaving, its body trembling. It let out a triumphant roar, a signal to Arthur that the tide had turned. Arthur felt a surge of hope. He had never seen anything like it. The creatures were weakened, leaderless. This was their chance. He charged forward, his knife raised, his fear replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He fought with renewed vigor, his movements faster, more precise. He slashed and stabbed at the creatures, cutting them down one by one. Guardian joined him, its strength renewed. Together, they fought back to back, a force of nature against the unnatural. The creatures fell before them, their bodies piling up on the ground. Slowly but surely, they began to push the creatures back, driving them towards the edge of the clearing. The creatures, sensing defeat, began to flee, disappearing back into the shadows of the trees. Finally, the last creature was gone. The clearing was silent, save for the sound of Arthur's ragged breathing and Guardian's low growl. They had won. Arthur collapsed to his knees, exhausted and battered. He looked at Guardian, its body covered in wounds, its fur matted with blood. He felt a surge of gratitude, a deep sense of respect for this creature that had risked its life to protect him, to protect the world. He crawled over to Guardian, reaching out a hand to touch its fur. Guardian flinched at first, then relaxed, allowing Arthur to stroke its head. "Thank you," Arthur said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for everything." Guardian let out a soft rumble, a sound of contentment. It nudged Arthur with its head, a gesture of affection. Arthur knew that the battle was not over. The creatures would return, and they would be stronger, more organized. The dimensional barrier was still weak, and the threat of invasion remained. But for now, they had won a victory. They had bought themselves some time, time to prepare, time to find a way to permanently seal the gateway. He knew that he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, allies who would believe him, who would be willing to fight. He needed to find a way to convince the world that the threat was real, that the fate of humanity hung in the balance. He stood up, his body aching, his spirit renewed. He looked at Guardian, its eyes filled with determination. "We have a lot of work to do," he said. "Let's get started." Arthur and Guardian turned and walked away from the clearing, leaving behind the carnage and the darkness. They ventured deeper into the forest, searching for answers, searching for a way to save the world. The forest felt different now, scarred, tainted. He noticed the trees themselves seemed to shy away from the monolith's clearing, their branches bending away as though in pain. The immediate threat was gone, but the victory felt hollow. The images shared by Guardian haunted him. Planets consumed, civilizations extinguished. He realized this skirmish was a mere symptom of a cosmic disease. The creatures they fought were foot soldiers, the sorcerer a low-ranking officer. What kind of power commanded them? What were the ultimate goals of this invading force? He also grappled with a more immediate concern, evidence. He needed proof to present to the world, something beyond his word and the ramblings of an old hermit. He glanced at Guardian, a creature ripped straight from folklore. While its existence was undeniable to him, presenting it to the world would likely result in its capture, study, and likely, dissection. That was unacceptable. As they walked, Arthur began formulating a plan. He needed to document everything, meticulously. He would return to the clearing, collect samples of the strange fungi, the obsidian from the monolith, and even the blood of the sorcerer. He would analyze them, study them, and try to understand their composition. He hoped to find something, anything, that would prove the existence of the other dimension and the threat it posed. But even with scientific proof, he knew that convincing the world would be an uphill battle. People were inherently skeptical of the unknown, especially when it challenged their understanding of reality. He needed to find someone influential, someone with the resources and the credibility to spread the word. A scientist? A politician? A journalist? The possibilities seemed endless, yet none of them felt right. He needed someone who was open-minded, someone who was willing to believe the impossible. He then considered the creatures themselves. Their misshapen forms, their malevolent intelligence, suggested a deliberate corruption of existing life forms. Were they created, or were they transformed? Could the monolith be responsible? Did it emit a radiation, a frequency, that warped living tissue? He needed to understand the mechanics of their creation, to find a way to reverse the process, or at least to prevent it from spreading. Guardian stopped abruptly, its head cocked to one side. It let out a low growl, a sign that something was amiss. Arthur tensed, his hand reaching for his knife. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Guardian turned its head, indicating a direction with its snout. Arthur followed its gaze, peering into the darkness of the trees. He saw nothing, but he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a sense of being watched. "Are they back?" he asked. Guardian shook its head. It let out another growl, a different sound this time, a sound of confusion. It took a few steps forward, sniffing the air. Arthur followed close behind, his senses on high alert. They ventured deeper into the trees, the darkness growing thicker, the silence more profound. Suddenly, they came to another clearing, smaller than the one with the monolith. In the center of the clearing stood a tree, an ancient oak, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. The tree was unlike any other Arthur had ever seen. Its bark was smooth and silver, its leaves a deep shade of purple. It emanated a sense of peace, a feeling of ancient wisdom. Beneath the tree, sitting in a circle, were three figures. They were cloaked and hooded, their faces obscured by shadow. Arthur couldn't tell if they were human or not. They were completely still, silent, their presence radiating an aura of immense power. Guardian stopped at the edge of the clearing, its body tense, its eyes fixed on the figures. It let out a low growl, a warning sound. The figures didn't react. They remained still, silent, their presence unwavering. Arthur felt a surge of fear, a primal instinct to flee. But he stood his ground, his hand tightening on his knife. He knew that he couldn't run. He had to face whatever these figures were, whatever they represented. He took a step forward, his voice trembling. "Who are you?" he asked. "What do you want?" One of the figures raised its head, its face still obscured by shadow. It spoke, its voice a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in Arthur's very bones. "We are the Keepers," it said. "We have been waiting for you." The Keepers. The word echoed in Arthur's mind, stirring a faint memory, a half-forgotten legend. He had read about them in one of his ancient texts, a cryptic passage that spoke of guardians of the balance, protectors of the earth. Were these the same keepers? Were they allies, or enemies? What do you want with me? Arthur asked, his voice regaining its strength. We know what you have seen, the keeper said. We know what you have done. You have awakened a power that has been dormant for centuries. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't like the sound of that. He had awakened a power. What did that mean? The monolith, he said. The creatures from the other dimension. Is that what you're talking about? The keeper nodded. The monolith is a gateway, a conduit to another reality. It has been sealed for millennia, but your actions have weakened the seal. My actions? Arthur asked, confused. What did I do? You sought knowledge, the keeper said. You delved into the forbidden. You opened your mind to the unknown. And in doing so, you opened the door to the darkness. Arthur felt a surge of anger. He had been trying to protect the world, to prevent the invasion of the creatures from the other dimension. How could he be responsible for their awakening? I was trying to help, he said. I was trying to save the world. Your intentions were noble, the keeper said. But your methods were reckless. You played with forces that you did not understand. So what am I supposed to do now? Arthur asked, his voice filled with desperation. How do I fix this? How do I seal the gateway? The keeper paused for a moment, its silence heavy with contemplation. The answer lies in the past, it said. You must journey to the source of the monolith, to the place where it was created. There, you will find the knowledge you need to seal the gateway once and for all. Where is this place? Arthur asked. It is far from here, the keeper said. It is a place of ancient power, a place of forgotten secrets. It is a place that few have ever seen, and even fewer have ever returned from. Tell me where it is, Arthur said, his voice filled with resolve. I'll go there. I'll do whatever it takes to save the world. The keeper nodded. The place you seek is known as the Obsidian City, it said. It lies hidden beneath the sands of the desert, in a land far to the east. The Obsidian City. The name sent a shiver down Arthur's spine. He had read about it in his ancient texts, a mythical city said to be built by beings from another world. Was this the source of the monolith? Was this the key to sealing the gateway? He knew that he had to go there. He had to find the Obsidian City, no matter the cost. I'll go, he said. But I'll need help. I can't do this alone. The keeper turned its head, looking at Guardian. You will have your companion, it said. But you will also need others. Seek out those who share your vision, those who are willing to fight for the future of this world. Who? Arthur asked. Who can I trust? You will know them when you see them, the keeper said. They will be drawn to you, guided by the same forces that brought you here. Arthur nodded, his mind racing. He needed to find allies, people who would believe him, people who would be willing to risk their lives to save the world. But where would he find them? How would he convince them? He looked at the keeper, his eyes filled with hope. Will you help me? He asked. Will you guide me? The keeper shook its head. We cannot interfere directly, it said. We can only offer guidance, provide knowledge. The rest is up to you. Arthur felt a pang of disappointment. He had hoped that the keepers would be able to offer more assistance, to provide him with the resources and the power he needed to succeed. But he realized that he couldn't rely on them. He had to do this himself. He took a deep breath, steeling his resolve. He knew that the journey ahead would be long and dangerous, filled with challenges and obstacles. But he was determined to succeed, to save the world from the darkness that threatened to consume it. Thank you, he said to the keeper. Thank you for your guidance. The keeper nodded. Go now, it said. The fate of the world rests on your shoulders. Arthur turned and walked away from the clearing, Guardian following close behind. They ventured back into the forest, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. As they walked, Arthur began to think about the journey ahead. He needed to prepare, to gather supplies, to find allies. He needed to learn more about the Obsidian City, to understand the challenges he would face. He also needed to figure out how to explain all of this to the world. How could he convince people that the threat was real, that the fate of humanity hung in the balance? He needed to find a way to break through the skepticism and the disbelief, to awaken people to the truth. He knew that it wouldn't be easy. But he was determined to try. He had a responsibility to act, to protect the world from the darkness that threatened to consume it. And he wouldn't rest until he had succeeded. He and Guardian emerged from the trees, back into the familiar clearing where he had left his camp. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. Arthur felt a sense of weariness, a deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical. He had been through so much in the past few days, he had seen things that he never thought possible. He looked at Guardian, its eyes filled with concern. He knew that it was tired too. They both needed rest, time to recover and to prepare for the journey ahead. They made their way back to Arthur's cabin, a small, secluded structure nestled deep within the woods. Arthur lit a fire, casting a warm glow throughout the cabin. He prepared a simple meal, sharing it with Guardian. As they ate, Arthur began to think about his next steps. He needed to gather information, to research the Obsidian City, to find clues that would guide him on his journey. He also needed to reach out to the world, to find allies who would be willing to help him. He decided to start by contacting an old friend, a professor of archaeology who had always been interested in the unexplained. He had helped Arthur translate some of the ancient texts, and he had always been open to the possibility of the existence of other realities. He knew that it was a long shot, but he had nothing to lose. He needed to start somewhere, and his old friend seemed like the best place to begin. After the meal, Arthur sat down at his desk and began to write a letter. He described everything that had happened, from his encounter with Guardian to his meeting with the keepers. He explained the threat of the creatures from the other dimension, and he pleaded with his friend to help him find a way to seal the gateway. He finished the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it to his friend's university. He knew that it would take several days for the letter to arrive, but he had to do something. He couldn't just sit idly by while the world hurtled towards destruction. He looked at Guardian, its eyes fixed on him. He knew that it was waiting for him, ready to embark on the journey to the Obsidian City. But he needed to be patient, to prepare carefully, to gather the resources he would need to succeed. He stood up from his desk and walked over to Guardian, reaching out to touch its fur. "We'll be ready soon," he said. "We'll find the Obsidian City, and we'll seal the gateway. I promise you." Guardian let out a soft rumble, a sound of reassurance. It nudged Arthur with its head, a gesture of affection. Arthur smiled. He knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but he wasn't afraid. He had Guardian by his side, and he had a purpose. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, to fight for the future of the world. As he drifted off to sleep that night, he dreamt of the Obsidian City, of towering structures of black stone, of strange and alien beings, of a gateway to another reality. He knew that his journey was just beginning, and that the fate of the world rested on his shoulders. The dream offered more questions than answers. What was the city like before the monolith? What happened to the beings that lived there? Were they all corrupted by the other dimension, or did some escape? Did they perhaps become the keepers? He shuddered at the thought. His hope now lay in that his message would reach his friend, Dr. Alastair Humphrey, in time. Dr. Humphrey was currently in the middle of an expedition in Egypt, so Arthur was worried that he would have to wait a very long time to get any answer. Days bled into weeks. Arthur maintained a rigorous training regimen, honing his combat skills with the knife and practicing wilderness survival techniques. He studied his ancient texts, poring over descriptions of deserts, mythical creatures, and forgotten technologies that might prove useful in the Obsidian City. He marked maps, tracing potential routes east, always mindful of the need for discretion. The less attention he drew to himself, the better. He knew that whatever had sent those creatures through the monolith wouldn't want him sealing it again. He had told no one else of his experience, feeling the weight of the secret like a physical burden. He'd crafted a plausible story for the local authorities, a rogue bear encounter, a brief period of disorientation, to explain the initial incident near the monolith. The less anyone knew of the true horror that lurked beneath the surface, the safer they would be. Guardian remained a constant presence, its loyalty unwavering. The creature seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, its protective instincts amplified. It patrolled the perimeter of the cabin, its senses alert for any sign of danger. Arthur found solace in its companionship, a reassurance that he wasn't entirely alone in this impossible quest. The letter to Dr. Humphrey felt like a castaway's message in a bottle, a desperate plea for help sent into the vast ocean of the unknown. Arthur checked his mail every day, his heart pounding with anticipation, only to be met with disappointment. He knew that international mail could be slow, especially to remote archaeological dig sites, but the delay gnawed at his nerves. Each passing day felt like a victory for the encroaching darkness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Guardian alerted him to an approaching vehicle. Arthur tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his knife. He hadn't been expecting anyone. A battered jeep pulled up to the cabin, its engine sputtering to a halt. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the fading light. It was a woman, tall and slender, with short, cropped hair and piercing blue eyes. She wore practical clothing, hiking boots, and carried a worn leather satchel slung over her shoulder. Arthur cautiously approached her, Guardian flanking his side. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice guarded. The woman smiled, a disarming expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Arthur Penhaligon?" she inquired. "I've been looking for you." "Who are you?" Arthur demanded, his suspicion growing. "My name is Evelyn Reed," she replied. "I'm a colleague of Dr. Alastair Humphrey." Arthur's heart skipped a beat. "You've heard from Alastair?" Evelyn nodded. "He received your letter. He was intrigued, to say the least. He asked me to come and investigate." Arthur hesitated. He had no reason to trust this woman, but she was his only lead. "What makes you think I'm telling the truth?" he challenged. "About any of this?" Evelyn's smile widened slightly. "Alastair sent me with a message. He said, tell Arthur to remember the significance of the serpent's eye in the Narcotic manuscripts." Arthur's eyes widened in surprise. The serpent's eye was an obscure symbol, a recurring motif in a collection of forbidden texts that he and Alastair had studied years ago. It was a private joke, a reference that only they would understand. "All right," Arthur conceded, lowering his guard slightly. "I'll hear you out." Evelyn followed Arthur into the cabin, her gaze taking in the simple furnishings, the stacks of books, and the watchful presence of Guardian. She seemed unfazed by the creature, offering it a respectful nod. "Alastair couldn't come himself," Evelyn explained, settling into a chair. "He's on a dig in Egypt, and it's impossible for him to leave at the moment. But he believes your story. He's seen things, Arthur, things that defy explanation. He knows that there are forces at work in the world that we don't understand. So, what can you do?" Arthur asked, his voice filled with cautious hope. "I'm a linguist and a historian," Evelyn replied. "Alastair sent me to help you decipher any texts or symbols you might encounter. He also thought that my particular skill set might be useful." "Particular skill set?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, ornate pistol. It wasn't a modern weapon, it looked like an antique, with intricate carvings and a gleaming silver finish. "I'm also rather good at dealing with unpleasant situations," she said, her voice dry. Arthur stared at the pistol, a mixture of awe and apprehension washing over him. He was beginning to realize that Evelyn Reed was not just a linguist and a historian. She was something else entirely. "All right," Arthur said, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Welcome to the team." Evelyn spent the next few days poring over Arthur's research, meticulously examining his maps, notes, and translations. She asked probing questions, challenging his assumptions and offering new perspectives. She was a sharp and insightful scholar, with a keen eye for detail. Arthur found himself drawn to her intelligence and her unwavering resolve. She was a kindred spirit, someone who shared his thirst for knowledge and his willingness to confront the unknown. He began to trust her, to rely on her expertise. "The Obsidian City," Evelyn said one evening, tracing a finger across a faded map. "It's mentioned in several ancient texts, but the descriptions are contradictory. Some say it was a center of advanced civilization, a beacon of knowledge and enlightenment. Others describe it as a place of unspeakable evil, a gateway to a dark and terrifying dimension. The keepers said it was the source of the monolith," Arthur reminded her. "The place where it was created." "That makes sense," Evelyn replied. "The monolith is likely a piece of technology, something that was designed to open a portal to another reality. The Obsidian City must have been where it was developed and built. But why?" Arthur wondered. Why would anyone want to open a gateway to another dimension? Evelyn shrugged. Perhaps they were seeking knowledge, power, or something else entirely. The motives of ancient civilizations are often shrouded in mystery. But whatever their reasons, it's clear that they unleashed something they couldn't control. "The keepers said the answer to sealing the gateway lies in the past," Arthur said. "We need to find out what happened in the Obsidian City, what caused the monolith to be activated." "Then we need to find the city," Evelyn replied. "And that's where things get tricky. According to the texts, it's located somewhere beneath the sands of the desert, far to the east. But the exact location is unknown. It's been lost for centuries." Arthur felt a surge of frustration. How are we supposed to find a city that's been lost for centuries? "We follow the clues," Evelyn said, her eyes gleaming with determination. The texts mention several landmarks, geographical features, and astronomical alignments that might help us pinpoint its location. "It's going to be a long and difficult journey, but I'm confident that we can find it." Arthur nodded, his resolve renewed. He had Evelyn by his side, and together they would unravel the mysteries of the Obsidian City and seal the gateway to the other dimension. They spent the next few days preparing for their journey. They gathered supplies, acquired maps, and studied the languages and customs of the regions they would be traveling through. Evelyn insisted on packing a variety of weapons and ammunition, including several antique firearms and a selection of exotic explosives. "You never know what we might encounter," she said, her tone grim. "It's always better to be prepared." Arthur was starting to realize that Evelyn was more than just a scholar and a historian. She was a warrior, a survivor, a force to be reckoned with. He was grateful to have her on his side. Finally, the day arrived when they were ready to depart. They loaded their supplies into Evelyn's jeep, said goodbye to Arthur's cabin, and set off on their long and perilous journey east. Guardian rode in the back of the jeep, its eyes scanning the horizon, its senses alert for any sign of danger. As they drove away from the forest, Arthur looked back at his cabin, a small, secluded structure nestled deep within the woods. He didn't know if he would ever see it again. But he knew that he had to do everything in his power to save the world from the darkness that threatened to consume it. The first leg of their journey took them through bustling cities and sprawling farmlands. They traveled under the guise of researchers, asking questions, gathering information, and trying to avoid attracting attention. Evelyn's knowledge of languages and cultures proved invaluable, allowing them to blend in and navigate unfamiliar territories. As they ventured further east, the landscape began to change. The lush green fields gave way to arid plains, and the bustling cities were replaced by small, isolated villages. The air grew hotter and drier, and the sun beat down with relentless intensity. They encountered various challenges along the way. They had to bribe corrupt officials, evade suspicious border guards, and navigate treacherous mountain passes. They faced sandstorms, flash floods, and encounters with hostile wildlife. But through it all, they persevered, driven by their determination to reach the Obsidian City and seal the gateway to the other dimension. Arthur was also curious about Evelyn. How did she get so skilled? He didn't know much about her, and there were some things about her that he found strange. One evening, as they camped beneath a starlit sky, Arthur decided to ask Evelyn about her past. "So, Evelyn," he said, stirring the embers of their campfire. "How did you get involved in all of this? I mean, you're a linguist and a historian, but you also seem to know a lot about weapons and other things." Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "It's a long story," she said. "But I suppose you deserve to know." She told Arthur about her childhood, growing up in a family of archaeologists and adventurers. Her parents were obsessed with uncovering lost civilizations and ancient secrets, and they often took her on expeditions to remote and dangerous locations. "I learned to shoot a gun before I learned to read," Evelyn said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "My parents were more interested in finding lost artifacts than in raising a child." She explained that her parents had disappeared years ago, while searching for a legendary city in the Amazon rainforest. Their fate was unknown, but Evelyn suspected that they had stumbled upon something dangerous, something that had led to their demise. "I've been searching for them ever since," Evelyn said, her eyes filled with sadness. "I hope that one day, I'll find out what happened to them." Arthur felt a pang of sympathy for Evelyn. He understood what it was like to lose loved ones and to be driven by a sense of purpose. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he said. "I can't imagine what you've been through." "It's all right," Evelyn replied, forcing a smile. "I've learned to cope. And besides, I've found a new purpose. Helping you seal the gateway to the other dimension. It's the most important thing I've ever done." Arthur nodded, his heart filled with gratitude. He was lucky to have Evelyn by his side. She was a true friend, a trusted ally, and a formidable warrior. As they continued their journey east, they began to encounter signs that they were on the right track. They found ancient ruins, forgotten temples, and cryptic symbols that matched the descriptions in the ancient texts. One day, they came across a small, isolated village nestled in a remote valley. The villagers were wary of outsiders, but Evelyn's knowledge of their language and customs helped them to gain their trust. The village elder, a wizened old man with piercing blue eyes, told them about a legend of a lost city that lay hidden beneath the sands of the desert. He said that the city was once a place of great power and knowledge, but that it had been cursed by the gods and buried beneath the earth. "The city is guarded by terrible creatures," the elder warned. "Those who seek to enter it will face unimaginable horrors." Arthur and Evelyn exchanged a look. They knew that they were getting closer to the Obsidian City. "Can you tell us how to find it?" Arthur asked. The elder hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I will draw you a map," he said. "But be warned, the journey is perilous. Many have tried to find the city, but none have ever returned." The elder drew a map in the sand, depicting a series of landmarks and geographical features that led to the location of the Obsidian City. Arthur and Evelyn carefully copied the map onto a piece of parchment, thanking the elder for his help. As they prepared to leave the village, the elder gave them a final warning. "The city is not what it seems," he said. "It is a place of darkness and corruption. Do not let its power consume you." Arthur and Evelyn nodded, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. They knew that the journey ahead would be dangerous, but they were determined to reach the Obsidian City and seal the gateway to the other dimension. They followed the map for days, navigating treacherous terrain and evading hostile creatures. The desert was a harsh and unforgiving environment, and they faced constant challenges. But they persevered, driven by their unwavering resolve. Arthur's training and survival skills, combined with Evelyn's knowledge of languages and cultures, allowed them to overcome every obstacle they encountered. Finally, after weeks of travel, they reached the location marked on the map. It was a desolate and barren landscape, with nothing but sand dunes and rocky outcrops as far as the eye could see. Arthur and Evelyn stood at the edge of a vast canyon, gazing down into the abyss. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, and the ground vibrated with an unsettling energy. "This is it," Evelyn said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Obsidian City is down there." Arthur took a deep breath, steeling his resolve. He knew that the most dangerous part of their journey was about to begin. "Let's go," he said, his hand reaching for his knife. "It's time to face the darkness." They began their descent into the canyon, carefully navigating the steep and treacherous slopes. The deeper they went, the colder and darker it became. As they reached the bottom of the canyon, they found themselves standing before a massive wall of black obsidian. The wall was smooth and seamless, with no visible cracks or openings. It stretched as far as the eye could see, blocking their path forward. "This is it," Evelyn said, her voice filled with awe. "The entrance to the Obsidian City." They examined the wall carefully, searching for a way to open it. They tried pushing, pulling, and prying, but the obsidian remained impenetrable. "There must be a mechanism," Arthur said, frustrated. "Some way to open this thing." They searched the surrounding area for clues, examining the rocks, the sand, and the ancient symbols that were etched into the canyon walls. Finally, Evelyn found something. It was a small, circular indentation in the obsidian wall, hidden beneath a layer of sand. "Arthur, look at this," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I think I found something." Arthur rushed over to Evelyn and examined the indentation. It was perfectly round, about the size of a human hand. "What do you think it is?" Arthur asked. "I don't know," Evelyn replied. "But I have a feeling that it's the key to opening the wall." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, obsidian disc. It was a relic that she had acquired from a remote tribe in South America. "I've been carrying this around for years," Evelyn said. "I always had a feeling that it would come in handy someday." She carefully placed the obsidian disc into the indentation in the wall. The disc fit perfectly, with a satisfying click. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The obsidian wall vibrated, and a series of grinding noises echoed through the canyon. A section of the wall slowly slid open, revealing a dark and foreboding passage. The air that emanated from the passage was cold and stale, carrying the scent of decay and ancient secrets. Arthur and Evelyn exchanged a look. They knew that they were about to enter a place of unimaginable danger. "Are you ready?" Arthur asked. "More than ready," Evelyn replied, her hand gripping her pistol. "Let's do this." They stepped into the passage, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The darkness enveloped them, and they disappeared into the unknown depths of the Obsidian City. The fate of the world now rested on their shoulders. As they stepped further inside, both of them feel a strange sensation, as if they were being scanned by an unknown force. The passage sloped downwards, the obsidian walls slick with an unnatural moisture. Arthur activated the headlamp he had brought, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness to reveal a tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth. Evelyn followed close behind, her own light illuminating the immediate surroundings, Guardian padding silently between them, its low growl a constant reminder of the potential dangers that lurked in the shadows. The air grew heavier, thick with a palpable sense of dread. Arthur could feel a tingling sensation on his skin, a prickling awareness that they were not alone. He glanced at Evelyn, her face grim, her eyes darting nervously from side to side. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded. "Something's not right. The energy here, it's different. Malevolent." They continued their descent, their senses on high alert. The silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water echoing through the tunnel and Guardian's occasional, barely audible snarl. The walls began to narrow, the passage constricting around them until they were forced to walk single file. The obsidian felt cold and smooth beneath their fingertips, as if it were polished by countless unseen hands. After what seemed like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The beam of Arthur's headlamp struggled to penetrate the darkness, revealing a space that was impossibly large, its ceiling lost in the shadows high above. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and decay, a nauseating stench that made Arthur's stomach churn. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they began to make out shapes in the gloom. Colossal pillars of obsidian rose from the cavern floor, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and shift in the periphery of their vision. Strange, geometric patterns adorned the walls, pulsing with a faint, ethereal light. In the center of the cavern, a massive structure loomed, its form too chaotic and grotesque to be easily comprehended. It was a twisted amalgamation of obsidian and bone, a monument to some unspeakable horror. "What is that thing?" Arthur breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. Evelyn stared at the structure, her face pale. I don't know. But I don't like it. Guardian whimpered, pressing close to Arthur's leg. Its fur stood on end, its eyes fixed on the central structure, a low, guttural growl rumbling in its chest. As they cautiously approached the structure, they began to notice other details in the cavern. Scattered across the floor were the remains of countless skeletons, their bones bleached white by time and exposure. Fragments of rusted metal and tattered cloth lay scattered among the bones, remnants of those who had come before and met their doom in this forsaken place. "This is a graveyard," Arthur said, his voice heavy with dread. "A graveyard for adventurers." Evelyn nodded grimly. "We need to be careful. We're not the first to come here, and we probably won't be the last. But we have to make sure we're the ones who leave." They moved forward cautiously, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. As they drew closer to the central structure, they began to hear a faint humming sound, a low, resonant drone that seemed to vibrate through the very bones in their bodies. The sound grew louder and louder, until it was almost deafening, a constant, throbbing presence that filled the cavern. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The pillars of obsidian swayed, and the carvings on the walls seemed to come alive, their grotesque figures twisting and writhing in a macabre dance. The central structure pulsed with an eerie light, its twisted form casting long, distorted shadows across the cavern floor. From the shadows, creatures began to emerge. They were tall and gaunt, their bodies covered in a glistening black chitin. Their limbs were elongated and spindly, ending in razor-sharp claws. Their heads were small and insectoid, with multifaceted eyes that glowed with an eerie red light. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their claws clicking against the obsidian floor. "What are those things?" Arthur gasped, raising his rifle. Evelyn stared at the creatures, her face etched with horror. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like them before." The creatures surged forward, their claws outstretched, their eyes fixed on Arthur and Evelyn. Guardian lunged forward, snapping and snarling, tearing into the creatures with its powerful jaws. Arthur opened fire, his rifle booming in the cavern, bullets tearing through the creature's chitinous armor. Evelyn joined in, her pistols blazing, sending rounds ripping through the air. The creatures fell, their bodies twitching and spasming on the ground. But more and more of them emerged from the shadows, their numbers seemingly endless. Arthur and Evelyn fought back to back, their weapons spitting fire, desperately trying to hold back the tide of creatures. Guardian fought with a ferocity that belied its age, tearing through the creatures with savage abandon. But even its strength was waning, its fur matted with blood, its breath coming in ragged gasps. Arthur knew that they couldn't hold out forever. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by creatures that seemed to be impervious to pain. They needed to find a way out, a way to escape this nightmare. "Evelyn, we need to move," Arthur shouted, firing a volley of shots into the advancing creatures. "We can't stay here and fight them all." Evelyn nodded, her face grim. "I see a passage on the other side of the cavern. If we can make it there, we might have a chance." They fought their way towards the passage, pushing through the horde of creatures, their weapons blazing. Guardian cleared a path for them, its teeth and claws tearing through the creatures' ranks. They reached the passage, diving inside just as the creatures swarmed around them. The passage was narrow and dark, but it offered a brief respite from the relentless onslaught. They ran through the passage, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the obsidian city. They could still hear the creatures behind them, their clicking claws echoing through the tunnels. "They're still coming," Evelyn shouted, glancing back over her shoulder. "We need to find a way to lose them." As they ran, they noticed a series of alcoves along the walls of the passage. Each alcove contained a small, obsidian pedestal, upon which rested a strange, geometric artifact. "What are those things?" Arthur asked, slowing down. Evelyn examined one of the artifacts, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I think they're some kind of resonators. They seem to be emitting a faint energy pulse. Could we use them to stop the creatures?" Arthur asked. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "It's worth a try. If we can overload the resonators, we might be able to create a sonic barrier that will keep the creatures away." They stopped at one of the alcoves and began to examine the resonator. It was a complex device, made of interlocking pieces of obsidian. As they touched it, they could feel a faint tingling sensation, as if the artifact were alive. "How do we overload it?" Arthur asked. Evelyn studied the resonator for a moment, then pointed to a small, crystalline node at its center. "I think if we can disrupt that node, it will cause the resonator to overload." Arthur pulled out his knife and carefully inserted it into the crystalline node. He twisted the knife, applying pressure to the node. Suddenly, the resonator began to hum, its energy pulse intensifying. The walls of the passage vibrated, and the air crackled with electricity. "It's working!" Evelyn shouted. "Keep going." Arthur continued to twist the knife, pushing the resonator to its limit. The humming grew louder and louder, until it was almost deafening. With a final twist, the crystalline node shattered. The resonator exploded in a burst of energy, sending shards of obsidian flying through the air. The passage filled with a deafening screech, and the walls began to shake violently. Arthur and Evelyn ducked for cover, shielding their faces from the debris. When the noise subsided, they looked up to see that the passage was now filled with a shimmering, sonic barrier. The creatures were still there, clawing at the barrier, but they were unable to penetrate it. "It worked!" Arthur exclaimed, relief washing over him. "We stopped them." Evelyn smiled, her eyes filled with triumph. "For now, at least. But we can't stay here forever. We need to keep moving, to find a way to seal the gateway." They continued their journey through the obsidian city, navigating the labyrinthine passages, avoiding the creatures that roamed the tunnels. They used the resonators to create sonic barriers, slowing down their pursuers and giving them time to rest. As they ventured deeper into the city, they began to notice changes in the architecture. The obsidian walls became more ornate, adorned with intricate carvings and grotesque sculptures. The passages grew wider and more spacious, leading into vast chambers that were filled with strange and unsettling artifacts. They found ancient libraries filled with crumbling scrolls and forgotten texts. They discovered laboratories filled with bizarre contraptions and alchemical apparatus. They stumbled upon temples dedicated to long-dead gods, their altars stained with the blood of countless sacrifices. Everywhere they went, they were confronted with evidence of the city's dark and sinister past. They learned of the Obsidian City's rise to power, its mastery of arcane knowledge, and its descent into corruption and madness. They discovered that the city had been built by a race of beings known as the Obsidian Lords, beings who had sought to unlock the secrets of the universe and to transcend the limitations of mortality. But in their quest for knowledge, they had delved too deep, unleashing forces that they could not control. They had opened a gateway to another dimension, a dimension of chaos and darkness. And through that gateway, they had allowed unspeakable horrors to enter their world. The creatures that now roamed the Obsidian City were not merely monsters. They were the embodiment of the city's sins, the physical manifestation of its corruption and madness. They were the guardians of the gateway, the protectors of the darkness that threatened to consume the world. Arthur and Evelyn knew that they had to stop them. They had to seal the gateway and prevent the darkness from spreading. But they also knew that the task would not be easy. The Obsidian City was a labyrinth of traps and illusions, a place where reality itself seemed to bend and distort. And the Obsidian Lords, though long dead, still lingered in the city, their spirits bound to the stones, their presence a constant reminder of the city's dark legacy. One day, as they explored a vast chamber filled with strange and shimmering crystals, they stumbled upon a hidden passage. The passage was narrow and dark, leading downwards into the depths of the earth. "Where does this lead?" Arthur asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Evelyn shrugged. "I don't know. But I have a feeling that it's important. Something is calling to me, drawing me down into the darkness." They hesitated for a moment, then decided to follow the passage. They descended deeper and deeper into the earth, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. Finally, the passage opened into a vast cavern. The cavern was filled with a swirling mist, and the air crackled with energy. In the center of the cavern, a massive portal shimmered, its surface rippling with colors that defied description. "The gateway," Arthur breathed, his voice filled with awe. "We found it." Evelyn nodded, her eyes fixed on the portal. "Yes. But it's not what I expected. It's unstable. The energy is fluctuating wildly." As they watched, the portal began to grow larger, its surface rippling and distorting. Cracks appeared in the fabric of reality, and glimpses of another dimension could be seen through the tears. "It's about to collapse," Evelyn shouted. "If it does, it will unleash unimaginable horrors upon our world." They knew that they had to act quickly. They had to find a way to stabilize the portal, to prevent it from collapsing. But they had no idea how to do it. They were linguists and historians, not sorcerers or engineers. They looked around the cavern, searching for clues. They examined the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They studied the symbols that were etched into the stone. Suddenly, Evelyn gasped. "Arthur, look at this," she exclaimed, pointing to a series of crystalline structures that were arranged in a circle around the portal. "These crystals, they're resonating with the portal's energy. They seem to be acting as stabilizers." Arthur examined the crystals, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're right. If we can amplify their energy, we might be able to stabilize the portal." But how could they amplify the crystal's energy? They had no tools, no equipment. They were alone, in the heart of the Obsidian City, with the fate of the world resting on their shoulders. Then, Arthur remembered something. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, obsidian amulet. It was a gift from his grandfather, a Native American shaman. "This amulet," Arthur said, holding it up. "My grandfather told me that it has the power to amplify energy. He said that it could be used to heal the sick, to protect the innocent, to banish evil." Evelyn stared at the amulet, her eyes wide with amazement. "Do you think it could work?" she asked. Arthur shrugged. "I don't know. But it's worth a try. We have nothing to lose." He approached one of the crystalline structures and placed the amulet on its surface. As he did so, the amulet began to glow, its light pulsating in time with the portal's energy. The crystalline structure began to vibrate, its energy intensifying. The air crackled with electricity, and the cavern filled with a blinding light. Arthur stepped back, shielding his eyes. He could feel the amulet's energy coursing through his veins, filling him with a sense of power that he had never felt before. The portal began to stabilize, its surface smoothing out, the cracks in reality beginning to heal. The swirling mist in the cavern began to dissipate, revealing a breathtaking vista of another dimension. Arthur and Evelyn stared in awe at the sight before them. They saw landscapes that defied description, skies filled with swirling nebulae, and cities built of light and energy. They saw creatures that were both beautiful and terrifying, beings that existed on a plane of existence far beyond human comprehension. For a moment, they were lost in the wonder of it all. They forgot about the darkness, the monsters, the dangers that lurked in the Obsidian City. They were simply two adventurers, standing on the threshold of the unknown, gazing into the infinite possibilities of the universe. But their reverie was soon broken by a sudden tremor. The ground began to shake violently, and the portal began to flicker. "It's not over yet," Evelyn shouted. "The portal is still unstable. We need to do something, or it will collapse." Arthur nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that they were running out of time. They had to find a way to permanently seal the gateway, to prevent the darkness from ever returning. But how? As they stood there, desperately trying to come up with a plan, they heard a voice. The voice was ancient and powerful, filled with a sense of both sorrow and rage. "You cannot stop what is coming," the voice said. "The darkness is inevitable. It will consume all things, in the end." Arthur and Evelyn looked around, searching for the source of the voice. Then, they saw it. Standing in the shadows, a figure emerged. It was an obsidian lord, its body withered and decaying, its eyes burning with an unholy light. It was a remnant of the city's dark past, a guardian of the gateway, a servant of the darkness. "You cannot seal the gateway," the obsidian lord said, its voice dripping with malice. "For it is the only path to true power. It is the only way to transcend the limitations of mortality." Arthur and Evelyn knew that they had to fight. They had to defeat the obsidian lord and seal the gateway. But they also knew that they were facing an enemy that was far beyond their capabilities. The obsidian lord was a being of immense power, a master of arcane knowledge, a servant of the darkness. They had faced many challenges on their journey to the Obsidian City. They had overcome countless obstacles, defeated hordes of monsters, and survived traps that would have killed lesser adventurers. But this was different. This was a battle for the fate of the world. And they were facing an enemy that seemed to be unstoppable. The Obsidian Lord raised its hand, and a wave of dark energy surged forth, engulfing Arthur and Evelyn. They cried out in pain as the energy coursed through their bodies, burning their skin, twisting their minds. They staggered backwards, struggling to stay on their feet. "You cannot defeat me," the Obsidian Lord sneered. "I am the master of this city. I am the guardian of the gateway. And I will not allow you to interfere with my plans." Arthur gritted his teeth, summoning all of his strength. He raised his rifle, aiming it at the Obsidian Lord. "We won't let you win," Arthur said, his voice trembling with defiance. "We will seal the gateway. We will protect the world from your darkness." He pulled the trigger, and a bullet ripped through the air, striking the Obsidian Lord in the chest. But the bullet had no effect. It simply passed through the Obsidian Lord's body, leaving no mark. The Obsidian Lord laughed, its voice echoing through the cavern. "You cannot harm me with your mortal weapons. I am beyond your comprehension. I am immortal." Evelyn stepped forward, her face pale but determined. She raised her hands, channeling her own energy. "We may not be able to defeat you with weapons," Evelyn said. "But we can use our knowledge. We can use the power of the city against you." She began to chant, her voice resonating with ancient words. The crystals around the portal began to glow, their energy intensifying. The air crackled with electricity, and the cavern filled with a blinding light. The Obsidian Lord recoiled, its eyes widening in surprise. "What are you doing?" it hissed. "You cannot control the power of the city. It is too dangerous." Evelyn ignored the Obsidian Lord's warnings. She continued to chant, drawing upon the city's energy, channeling it into a powerful force. The crystals pulsed with light, their energy converging on the Obsidian Lord. The Obsidian Lord screamed, its body writhing in agony. The city's energy was too much for it to bear. It was being torn apart from the inside out. Its immortal form was beginning to crumble. With a final, desperate surge of power, the Obsidian Lord unleashed a wave of dark energy, targeting the crystals around the portal. If it could destroy the crystals, it could destabilize the gateway and unleash its power upon the world. Arthur saw what the Obsidian Lord was trying to do. He knew that he had to stop it. He had to protect the crystals. He lunged forward, throwing himself in front of the crystals, shielding them with his body. The wave of dark energy struck him, sending him flying backwards. He crashed to the ground, his body racked with pain. He could feel his bones breaking, his muscles tearing. He was dying. But he had done it. He had protected the crystals. He had saved the world. As he lay there, bleeding and broken, he saw Evelyn standing over him, her face filled with grief. "Arthur," she sobbed. "No. You can't die." Arthur smiled weakly. "It's okay, Evelyn," he whispered. "We did it. We saved the world." He closed his eyes, taking one last breath. And then, he was gone. Evelyn knelt beside Arthur's body, weeping. She had lost her friend, her ally, her partner. But she knew that she had to be strong. She had to finish what they had started. She stood up, her face set with determination. She turned to face the Obsidian Lord, which was now weakened and vulnerable. "You may have killed Arthur," Evelyn said, her voice filled with rage. "But you will not win. I will not let you." She raised her hands, channeling the city's energy. She unleashed a torrent of power, striking the Obsidian Lord with all of her force. The Obsidian Lord screamed, its body dissolving into dust. And then, it was gone. Evelyn stood alone in the cavern, panting and exhausted. The Obsidian Lord was defeated. The gateway was stable. The world was safe. But at what cost? She had lost Arthur, her friend and partner. And she knew that she would never be the same again. She walked over to Arthur's body and knelt beside it. She closed his eyes, smoothing his hair. "Thank you, Arthur," she whispered. "You were a true hero." She stood up, her face set with determination. She had to find a way to seal the gateway, to prevent the darkness from ever returning. She looked around the cavern, searching for clues. Then, she saw it. A small, obsidian tablet lying on the ground near the portal. She picked up the tablet and examined it. It was covered in ancient symbols, symbols that she recognized from her studies of ancient languages. She began to translate the symbols, her heart pounding with excitement. The tablet contained the instructions for sealing the gateway. She followed the instructions carefully, performing a series of rituals and incantations. The portal began to shrink, its surface becoming smooth and seamless. Finally, with a final surge of energy, the portal disappeared. The gateway was sealed. Evelyn stood alone in the cavern, exhausted but triumphant. She had done it. She had saved the world. She took one last look at Arthur's body, then turned and walked away. She had a long journey ahead of her. She had to leave the Obsidian City, to return to the world above. And she knew that she would never forget Arthur. He would always be her hero, her friend, her partner. She left the cavern, her heart filled with sadness and gratitude. She had faced the darkness, and she had emerged victorious. But she also knew that the darkness would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to return. And she knew that she would always be ready to fight it, to protect the world from its evil. As Evelyn retraced her steps through the Obsidian City, she felt a profound sense of loss, but also a renewed determination. The weight of Arthur's sacrifice settled heavily on her shoulders, a constant reminder of the price of victory. She navigated the treacherous passages with a grim efficiency, her senses alert for any remaining threats. The creatures that had once swarmed the city seemed to have retreated, perhaps sensing the absence of the Obsidian Lord's influence. The air felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere somewhat diminished. But the city itself remained a labyrinth of dark secrets and forgotten horrors. As she approached the entrance to the city, the obsidian wall that had once barred their way, she paused. She ran her hand over the smooth, cold surface, remembering the hope and trepidation she had felt when she first stood before it. Now, she felt only a deep weariness, a longing for the simple life she had once known. She activated the mechanism that opened the wall, and the passage slid open, revealing the canyon beyond. The sunlight streamed in, illuminating the darkness with a golden glow. She stepped out of the city, taking a deep breath of fresh air. The desert stretched before her, vast and empty, but somehow comforting in its simplicity. Guardian, who had remained faithfully by her side throughout the ordeal, nudged her hand with its head, its eyes filled with concern. She knelt down and hugged the loyal creature, finding solace in its presence. "It's okay, Guardian," she whispered. "We're safe now." She knew that she couldn't stay in the desert forever. She had to return to civilization, to report what had happened, to warn the world of the dangers that still lurked in the shadows. But before she left, she decided to perform one last act of remembrance for Arthur. She gathered some stones and built a small cairn near the entrance to the city, a simple monument to his courage and sacrifice. She placed a small, obsidian fragment on top of the cairn, a piece of the city that he had died to protect. Then, she stood for a moment, paying her respects, before turning and walking away. As she walked, she noticed something lying in the sand. It was Arthur's knife, the one he had used to protect the crystals. She picked it up, clutching it tightly in her hand. It was a tangible reminder of his presence, a symbol of his unwavering commitment to justice. She vowed to carry it with her always, to honor his memory, to continue his fight against the darkness. She made her way back to the jeep, which was parked some distance away. She loaded her supplies and prepared for the long journey ahead. As she drove away from the obsidian city, she looked back one last time. The city stood silent and imposing, a dark stain on the horizon. She knew that she would never forget what had happened there. The memories of her journey, of the dangers she had faced, of the friends she had lost, would stay with her forever. But she also knew that she had done the right thing. She had saved the world from a terrible evil. And she had honored the memory of Arthur, her friend and partner. As she drove into the setting sun, she felt a flicker of hope. The world was still a dangerous place, but it was also a place of beauty and wonder. And she was determined to protect it, to fight for it, to make it a better place for all. The journey ahead would be long and arduous, but she was not afraid. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. And she knew that she could face anything that came her way. The obsidian city was sealed, its secrets buried beneath the sands of time. But the memory of its darkness would linger, a constant reminder of the fragility of existence, and the importance of fighting for what is right. Evelyn drove on, into the night, her heart filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. The fate of the world rested on her shoulders, and she was ready to bear that burden. The story of the obsidian city may have ended, but her journey had just begun. What she didn't know was that the amulet that Arthur touched before his demise, reacted with his body. And inside Arthur's body, the amulet's energy merged with his soul. Arthur's soul did not disappear but was transported to another dimension, the same one that Obsidian Lord was trying to connect with. He was not dead, but he was in a new place. Would he be able to control his new power? Would he ever see Evelyn again? These were the questions that remained unanswered, lingering like a ghost in the desert wind.